In 1822, a man from New York named Benjamin Morrell set off on the ship simply named the Wasp. After being a bit of a troublemaker during the War of 1812 and dealing with multiple detainments, he finally had a respectable position as a sea captain and was about to conduct important exploration in the Antarctic region. Morrell's former superior fellow sea captain Robert Johnson manned a ship called the Henry, and the two would make their way down to the Falkland Islands. However, once at the Falklands, Morrell departed with the Wasp in November of 1822 to look for whaling areas further east. However, this would end up being quite the journey for Captain Morrell. First, they sailed all the way to Beaufort Island, without difficulty, to hunt some seals and then moved on to the Kerguelen Islands. Then they approached the coast of Antarctica in a region that we would today refer to as Wilkes Land by February 1st, 1823. On February 23rd, Captain Morrell reported that he had crossed the Prime Meridian, and by the 28th, they were reportedly back at the South Sandwich Islands. After a short rest, they went back south on March 6th into the Weddell Sea. There had been rumors of several islands nearby going back to 1762 when a Spanish merchant ship named Aurora claimed to spot an archipelago in the area. Morrell thought that perhaps he could find them, and on March 16th he reported that land was spotted. Morrell, however, was convinced that he had spotted the coast of Antarctica. Back in 1821, Morrell's former superior, Robert Johnson, had given the name to that area of the coast New South Greenland, so Morrell reported that his ship sailed along the coast of New South Greenland. Eventually, he would leave the area and sail into the Pacific, and then after a year in the Pacific Ocean, he arrived back in New York City in 1824. At least, that is the summary of the voyage that was reported in the book A Narrative of Four Voyages. Basically, Benjamin Morrell would go on to have more voyages, but they became less profitable for him over time. So by the 1830s, he was running into some money troubles. Since there was public interest in learning about his voyages, he published his book in 1832 to tell the world of his Antarctic ventures, as well as his other three major voyages. The tales were written rather boastfully, but were nevertheless an entertaining read for many readers. But upon publishing this, it turned out there were many issues with his story of that first journey. Throughout the journey, Morrell would keep track of his coordinates of his ship when he could, as that was custom for sailors making logs of journeys like this. However, his coordinates didn't always match up to what he reportedly saw, and some of them were rather dubious. There were claims that came off as a little too impressive. Firstly, he reported that he found Beaufort Island with ease, which is impressive considering he would have just been the third person in 100 years to find the island, and the first to ever land on it, all while not even reporting ice on the island at all, which is something that Beaufort Island has all year round. But the second and more skeptical part of the journey is how he somehow managed to circumnavigate a third of Antarctica's coastline in just 22 days. Based on the ships of the time period as well as typical wind conditions for the region, that probably wouldn't have worked based off of Antarctica's coast as we know it today. That would be impressively fast. Based on what was known about Antarctica's coast at the time, some speculated it might be possible that there would be a passage below the area that we know as Enderby's Land, which at the time had not been disproven. If that shortcut existed, then the journey would have been possible. But once that was disproven, it added to the list of issues with Morrell's account. But ultimately, Morrell's spotting of New South Greenland was the biggest hole in the story. Based on Morrell's logged coordinates, he was actually much further from the Antarctic coast than he stated. However, while this is a glaring hole, it is also uniquely the most difficult to prove or disprove. Just because he saw land at the wrong coordinates doesn't mean that he still didn't see land at all, right? So there were four possibilities. A, he did see the coast, but incorrectly logged his coordinates. Probably not as likely, but possible. B, he saw an actual random island and simply found a new location. C, he experienced a mirage or illusion of some kind. Or D, he just made it up. False land discoveries weren't new by any means. It wasn't uncommon to see what you think is land, but conditions aren't ideal for landing or diverting your path, so you simply log it as accurately as you can and move on. Icebergs from far distances have been mistaken for land before, and then there are types of mirages known as superior mirages, where even a small rock at sea can be magnified into appearing much larger than it actually is. And once you realize how often icebergs would appear in this region, that just makes it much harder to determine whether Morrell made an honest mistake or deliberately made it up. People at first were willing to believe that he simply spotted new land. Just as Morrell tried to look for the supposed Aurora Islands, people tried to look for the supposed New South Greenland Island, but they couldn't find it. Eventually, the money from the book and various speaking events ran out as public interest moved on, and Morrell found himself in financial trouble once again. But this time he committed financial fraud, which ruined his reputation. Mixing this with his troublemaker past and his rather boastful style of writing in the book, it did convince many people to lean into the interpretation that he simply made ship up for some sort of false glory. It didn't help that in one of the other journeys in the book, he also claimed to have found an island near Hawaii that also later turned out to not exist at all. A few maps would depict these claimed land sightings for a few decades afterwards, although often with a question mark acknowledging the skepticism behind the claimed discovery. Morrell ended up dying sometime in 1839 in his early 40s, and by that point his reputation was basically disgraced. This is a very short episode of Bad History, mainly because it's more straightforward. It's not a research paper involving a list of scholarly sources and arguments, it's someone telling a story that has a lot of holes in it. Despite the issue with Morrell's account of that Antarctic journey, there were many things within the book that were confirmed, such as witnessing a volcanic eruption in the Galapagos Islands, or his visit to Africa, so not all of it was under skepticism. But whether it was artificially padded with made-up boastful stories to sell more books, or it was a series of honest mistakes from seeing an iceberg mirage, at the end of the day, it was bad history. Thanks for watching.